Hi, everybody. Thanks for sticking around, coming to Los Angeles, for those of you that aren't locals already. My name's David Card. I'm the research director for Street Fight. I've been following sort of the intersection of technology and customer behavior and the media business for about more than 25 years now, and been working with Street Fight for 2 or 3 now. And as David said, this is our 3rd annual State of Hyperlocal report. And what we do when we're building up our research catalog or our research agenda is we think about talking to you, the companies that are mostly in the business of selling local marketing and commerce services to both small businesses and large enterprise local marketers. And we talk to them too, so that we want to sort of coordinate, understand what you're thinking about so that you can sort of take the pulse of your peers and your competitors and see what else is going on there, and then see if your objectives in R&D and marketing spending are actually in alignment with your own customers. So that's what I'm going to do today. I'll talk a bit about the current survey of you, and in fact the survey is still up, so if you want to add some opinions after you see this, go ahead. Please do. So far, we've got about 75 plus respondents, mostly at the C level or VP level, and it's a mix of tech providers, agencies, publishers, and the kind of people that you'd expect on the supply side of the connected local economy. So we'll talk about what their R&D looks like, what they think their customers need. I'll compare that to some surveys we've done late last year on small business buyers and on enterprise local marketers, and do some comparison and contrast and see if everybody is synced up or not, and where there might be some gaps or some opportunities. So let's look at what's hot first. And so the first thing is we asked this slide illustrates what the vendors, you guys primarily, think your customers have been increasing their local spending on recently. And social media marketing is at the top. Local websites, including presence management, is high, and then mobile marketing is I guess it's the new thing, but it's not so new anymore, but it's definitely one place where you're seeing increases going up, in contrast with things like paid search, email, traditional media. Now compare and contrast that with what our surveys told us last year from both the small businesses, so these are local merchants who have some digital presence, but they have a real store, and they're a small number of employees, fewer than 50 or fewer than 20 employees. They're in the yellow bar. And then the enterprise local marketers are big companies, so big national brands and multi-location brands, big retailers with a lot of branches or a lot of distributors. And we asked them what they were spending on. So what this slide illustrates is what portion of each of those groups said they were increasing their spending on the following 6 digital tactics. And first takeaway is that by and large, everybody said they were increasing or maintaining. There was only low single digit even numbers of people that said they were cutting back on their digital spending. Well, also, another thing to point out is that there's a little bit of a disconnect. There was a good connection on the social media marketing, but notice that, and the enterprises are spending a lot on local sites, as are a lot of them are spending on local sites, as are the small businesses. But there's things like email marketing, digital display advertising, and paid search marketing that are also seeing increases, where most of the typical Street Fight audience didn't really see that so much. So spending's pretty well synced on the big categories, but email marketing, paid search, especially with the idea that search is going to be changing dramatically as consumers and businesses use more sources for searching, as voice search takes off, as maps become a place for advertising more and more. There's a big fundamental rethinking of search that's going on, both on the SEO and on the paid search side. So could be some opportunities there. So next we asked the vendors, the Street Fight community, where they were investing their own R&D dollars. So this slide illustrates what share of them said it was in one of their top 3. And so the clear takeaways here is online to offline attribution, local presence, and local data and analytics are sort of in that top tier, followed pretty closely by investing in mobile, social media, and content or native advertising. A couple things to point out. The companies, the vendors who primarily sell to enterprises are driving the O2O, the attribution, online to offline stuff. by an order, not really an order of magnitude, but they were twice as likely to say they were investing there, whereas the companies that sold to small businesses are much more likely to say they're doing local listings management or things that are more product specific to that kind of a niche. So a lot of that's the taking the pulse, and let's see what they're not spending on. So the things that fell to the bottom of the R&D priorities, so these are things that either might get invested in the future, and I'll show you a slide about that in a minute or two, or they might be things that are sort of fading in interest. For instance, beacons is a kind of thing that was a super hot topic 2 or 3 years ago, and it hasn't really bounced back yet. I think the deployments have been disappointing. Chatbots is sort of the new buzzword, but it also isn't particularly high on priorities lists. So let's compare that, the R&D trends that we're seeing. Attribution and online to offline attribution in particular, or ROI mating, is going to be a continuing theme. and think about the sort of the intersection of social, mobile, and data analytics in helping to solve that attribution problem. And there's some other technologies that might play a big role there as well that weren't getting as much attention. Things like digital wallets and payments and point of sale systems is likely to be a way to help close that loop with the attribution problem. Curious what might be the thing that sort of differentiates local sites. So what's the next technology that, besides doing a great job of making sure you're discovered in searches and handling how search is going to evolve, what else about site investment is going to make that product, for a small business or for a big company who has branch sites, what's going to make that different? Is it personalization? Maybe that's probably the next new thing. I sort of hinted at my wallets pitch. Wallets has been disappointing in consumer adoption, I will say that, but I will observe that in contrast to wallets, voice is at critical mass. I think what we've seen in consumer technology adoptions is whenever 20% of US households adopt a new technology, that's when markets start to take off and new technologies get born. VCRs spawning Blockbuster, not necessarily a great example of long-term health, but an example of that happening. Voice search, whether it's in the phone or in the home, is at that critical mass point right now, so you should be investing in and looking forward at it. So let's compare that R&D strategy with what customers say they need. So we asked the small businesses where they need the most help. We just flat out asked them in our survey. And SEO and paid search were absolutely at top of the list, followed by a key social media technology of reputation management. And then the list drops off pretty fast after that. So they're telling us that they need a lot of help there, and maybe that reflects a pretty smart investment strategy, R&D strategy on the companies that were focusing on things like listings and presence management because they were primarily selling to SMBs. So good sync point there. Another way to look at what a company needs is what they think is effective and what is ineffective. And what this slide illustrates is what the enterprise local marketers or the multi-location brands said were their most effective marketing techniques in support of their local objectives. And so you see email and paid social media and display advertising at the top, right up there with TV advertising. But places that they said weren't so effective is I think, a sign of where they need help. And that includes things like search, direct mail, and some of the new geo technologies. So geo or targeted online or mobile advertising or retargeted online or mobile advertising, they didn't seem to deem that particularly effective. I think that's in part because they're doing a lot of their search and mobile advertising in support of the corporate e-commerce site rather than the local branch business. So I suspect that we will change. They do tell us that they're shifting money towards, their digital budgets are shifting towards support of locals. So that's a good sign, but that might be a ripe opportunity. So think about those customer needs. SEO and paid search with these new consumer behaviors in terms of platforms for finding things and new technologies are going to need even more help than they ever did before. And that, because the voice, for instance, as I think was suggested a couple minutes earlier, it's going to have a huge impact on input, which means keywords, which means phrases, which means how you structure the schema of your data responses, and what a response, what does a search results page look like when it's spoken back to you or shown on your mobile screen. So it's going to have a huge impact as it becomes more prevalent. Mobile, right now, I think that the companies that are investing primarily in mobile it's a reach game rather than a targeting game. So you see that the big brands were they're increasing their spending on mobile, but they're not doing geo-targeting particularly yet. So again, they're probably just spending money with Facebook and to get at because that's where their audiences are. But that should shift, and I think that we'll see some movement in that. Social media is still top of mind, and that means reputation and reviews. And I wrote this, I wrote this slide even before Facebook announced yesterday that they're going to be doing more local, local news is going to be changed. They're tweaking the algorithm for the third time in the last 3 weeks. Yeah, social media is always going to be at the kind of beck and call of Facebook, at least for a while then. And then don't forget about opportunities in traditional media and direct mail, where big enterprises in particular are still spending and having mixed results, I guess. So then we turned the corner a little bit and we asked about what companies thought were the big challenges in the industry. So these are the top, I asked the vendors, what are the top 3 challenges facing the industry overall, not just your company, but the whole overall local, digital local business or ecosystem. And online to offline attribution showed up. So now it's not only the top challenge, it's also the top R&D priority, which is perhaps no accident. And again, this was driven by the companies that sell to enterprises or to multi-location brands. So the companies that primarily sell or exclusively sell to small businesses, they were more bugged by the kind of complex or fragmented ecosystem and the domination of big companies. And when we asked them explicitly what were their top 2, rank these challenges for your own individual company, first of all, the takeaway is that there's a lot of things that are challenges for individual companies, but that, again, ROI is probably the hardest thing both sides see, and then selling to national brands that market locally, it continues to be a challenge, and then raising companies, the company's brand awareness is a challenge, particularly for a startup or a smaller company. So let's look at some potential solutions to that. Well, ROI is also the biggest problem for the biggest pain point for brands. So the brands, when we asked them to rank what their biggest challenges were in implementing local digital technologies, ROI and attribution was at the top. Customer privacy and security is probably heightened by all the hacks that happened last year, and there's not a heck of a lot you can do about that as a supplier, so it's a concern. You need to obviously fit in with their own data privacy and security needs, but it's probably not your charter to solve that problem. However, managing multiple sources of information and different types of data analytics is also an issue. So if you're heavily into the data business or your products and services are dependent on data, these companies are going to need you to to clean up your data or structure it so that it fits in with their own existing CRM and other analytics. A potential solution to the raising brand awareness, we asked the vendors again, what were their biggest, most successful, most effective channels for themselves. Partners and resellers actually beat out their own sales force with social media shortly thereafter. So those seem to be the 3 things that people are focusing on, more so than kind of more brand awareness, traditional brand awareness tactics. As well. I'm still puzzling out what to make of this. I'm not surprised that your sales force would be the most effective thing for selling a complicated product, but there's got to be a way that we can, as an industry, work together to help on the content knowledge distribution or native advertising or something like that, content, those kinds of things to get the word out on both sides, especially the big guys, I suppose. So let's look at, we'll close off with a couple of, a little bit, this was, most of the questions we asked here were about the here and now or the next 18 to 24 months. Let's look what's a little bit on the longer horizon. So again, we asked the vendors what they were investing in that wasn't going to pay off in the next year or so, but it was so important that they needed to invest in it now. And this is what fell into their top 2 list. And location data and analytics was at the top, right up there with geo-targeting and geofencing, and AI for analytics. Voice technology a little bit behind that. mobile wallets and payments not too far behind. Clearly this is in support of that ROI proving and better targeting and creating more marketing services that do that. So these things seem logical. Again, I'll point out that things like chatbots and AR and VR are probably on the longer term horizon. And the notion of the SMB OS, the small business operating system, which then that you add more things to the technology stack, whether you start with a site or other kinds of marketing, and then you add operational services or commerce services or things like that. That's definitely a movement, and it's one that is actually perhaps being underinvested in by folks like us here today. I also AI is like in everybody's marketing collateral these days, right? And I suppose if artificial intelligence means pattern matching, then I suppose that's valid. I think real general purpose AI and natural language processing in and out is far less prevalent than just doing compare and contrast and simple recommendations maybe based on people who bought this also bought that. If that's AI, I guess that's true. But I wanted to ask people where they thought AI was actually useful. And two things really popped to the top of this list. It was not things like virtual assistants or voice chat or anything like that. It was customer segmentation and targeting and predictive purchase analysis. And I would say that that aligns with what I think is a smart move and what I'm hearing from companies that are having success using AI technologies, and maybe even applying that to something as mundane as email content creation and targeting. That might be a good way to think about things. And then compare that with what the new technologies that were on the horizon. So this question was, what new technologies are you evaluating or do you think is interesting? And this is the comparing and contrasting the enterprise or the multi-location brands and the local merchants. And what they're keen on most, both groups are highly interested in real-time location data and using that possibly to actually target mobile push marketing, really targeted instant things that pop up, the classic Tom Cruise movie kind of advertising that we've been promising forever and ever and ever and has never really been deployed. So they seem to think that that's interesting. The big guys are also interested in an addressable television, which is not quite here yet, but it's getting there. And then the little guys are interested in payments and wallets. So I think that's probably primarily payments more than wallets, but those are some of their top priorities. AI isn't super high on the list, but it's there. So they're possibly thinking of, because they're buzzing about it too, but they're probably thinking about it as a means to an end and maybe looking at the vendors to apply it to a solution rather than implementing anything that would look like artificial intelligence within their own businesses. And in this case, it's a good idea to be a little bit ahead of your customers. So let me close with a couple of key takeaways, and I'll be around for the rest of the day, and you can ask me lots of questions. First, in terms of syncing up the R&D with customer needs, pretty good sync. It looks like there's not any super dramatic disconnects between the supply side and the buyers. There is some potential opportunity in things that maybe you're not thinking hard enough about because they seem old-fashioned or mundane, like email and paid search, both of which are getting increases in spending, particularly with the enterprise local marketers. The customer needs, getting discovered, getting found, showing up in search, using display advertising for brand awareness, those kinds of things are still at the top of their list. And that's true for both small businesses and national, multi-location brands. Mobile, on the customer needs side, again, I sort of make my thesis is that it's mostly about reach today, but it's shifting more and more to actually delivering targeted messages, maybe even in real time, to people when they're in shopping mode or out and about. Everybody is frustrated by attribution. It's going to take a combination of technologies and services and agency work to solve those problems, but at least a lot of people are thinking about it, so it's at the top of the enterprise, local marketers, and the vendors' radars. It's not necessarily at the top of the radar for small business, but that's kind of like, they're not in the marketing business, they're in the results business in most cases. They don't have a lot of dedicated staff to proving the value of their marketing, although they would like to do that too. But I think that the attribution is clearly going to be driven by enterprise investment rather than small business spending on it. And then on the new tech side, again, I think the location data will shift a little bit from customer analysis and more towards actual targeting, and look for those kind of practical applications of artificial intelligence, maybe more so than than trying to redesign Siri or having her in your pocket and Scarlett Johansson answering your every need. And with that, like I said, I'll be around all day. Feel free to look me up and talk to me during the breaks and at lunchtime, and we will get a copy of these slides to you shortly after the event. So thank you for your time, and look forward to talking to you.